I was like everyone at home contemplating their future, trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I had a really good conversation with my friend Javier, and he was like, have you heard about Ikigai, the Japanese term for like self-fulfillment? And everyone's will be different because what you enjoy doing and what you're good at will all be very specific to yourself. For me, it just reaffirmed and made it very crystal clear the things that I wanted to do. 2 months later, I got the call from Excel and they asked me.
So, what's happening?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm well. So, as I was preparing for this, I was trying to find a way to describe you and what you do. And I had a very, very hard time doing it because there's writer, DJ, campaign manager, tastemaker, Nigerian, Jamaican. There's a lot of different words to say, but like, how would you describe yourself?
Oh, I did ask you if you're going to make me introduce myself, so there you go. How would I describe myself? It's a tough question. I guess all of those things potentially to be true. Maybe a curator, maybe would be something that covers a lot of that. From DJing side of things, like curating sets and music and radio. From a label side of things, I'm curating a roster of artists. From like the tape series we do, curating and bringing together, creative talents together and kind of creating one. Bringing people together. Curator might be the best.
Curator.
The best. Yeah, I like that.
I like that.
Yeah,
That's what you're going with.
I'm gonna stick with that for now. I'm gonna change it in 2 questions.
All right, cool. Okay, cool. And so then, if you think about your evolution or your journey to becoming, say, the curator that you are today, what was the first step? Like, how did it all start? Maybe start from your career, as it were, from the beginning.
We can start from uni because that's how we know each other. Do you remember when I've always obviously loved music and that's always been something I've been passionate about, but like a lot of people who are 19 don't necessarily know the infrastructure of an industry they want to get into and what jobs exist in that space. So I didn't even know there was opportunities and jobs in music world. I just knew I really enjoyed music and that was something I had a passion for. And I think it kind of started with, do you remember when me and Clem used to do, a mutual friend of ours, Clem, we used to do these kind of challenges where we put music up on Facebook.
Yeah. I remember that.
And we'd see like who got the most votes and like what song was like popping that no one had heard before. And that was kind of the insights into me knowing I wanted to kind of do something in that space. And then after uni, started working for Red Bull. And that was a grad scheme, so you got to kind of like figure out what you wanted to do in that space. And one of the teams I started working for was called the activation team, but in essence what they did marketing around different themes that Red Bull covered. So it was either sports, and then they were invested in music at that time. So I'll be doing a lot of the international music campaigns.
Oh, so straight off the back from uni, you went straight into, like when you went into Red Bull?
Yeah.
Because what attracted you to Red Bull in the first place? Because I remember, I guess, if you think about the perception of Red Bull then versus now, then it was very, very drinks focused. I feel like nowadays, if you Google Red Bull, one of the first results is going to be like the F1, more so than anything.
Yeah, ironically, I guess it's changed quite a lot in the last 10 years. But when I was there, they were very invested in music. F1 was relatively new, but still something there was a lot of energy into, and then also sport as well in a broader sense. But it's a big company essentially, and each kind of department has its own focus, and ours was marketing as a whole, and then I specifically was focusing on the music side of things, and I was living in Austria at that time because that's where the grad scheme took place, which was quite
That was a big jump, though.
That was a big jump,
I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed visiting you out in Austria. Like, I still remember going to the Red Bull complex, and it was like, it's like a fairy tale.
Yeah, it's mad. If you ever Google the HQ of Red Bull in Austria,
it's crazy.
It looks like a Bond villain's lair, which is quite mad. But then moved back to London and kind of stuck in that same space as wanting to do, music marketing essentially, and the campaigns that revolved around that. But then kind of hit a ceiling there because I wanted to do more things in music, and as much as I liked it, I feel like maybe the actual autonomy of what artists we book, what events we do, who's involved, the format of these kind of things. And I felt that I didn't have as much say as I would like to have in those things. And so my thinking was, how do I do something where I'm able to be more at the focal point of events, working with artists. And so I knew that that's what I wanted to do more of, but I really didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know what now seems like quite simple things, actually. I didn't know what a manager did. I didn't know what a booking agent was. Kind of understood the role as a label, but in that kind of space of time of me quitting Red Bull, I started my own club nights called Scenic Route, which then became, a few years later, my label. It went from finishing up at Red Bull, starting my own thing on the side, which is very autonomous. I kind of booked with the other two which artists would play at the night, what venue we'd do it at, what the kind of curation of that night would look like. And also did a few nights with other friends as well. But that got me into a really understanding of and motivated to really be the decision maker in those kind of creative endeavors.
So it's like you wanted to not just focus on one aspect of music, you still wanted to be involved in a lot of different areas, right?
Yeah, I think it was just more like, where can I have an opportunity to showcase my interests and the artists and music that I am interested and excited by, and how can I share that? And I think even then, till now, that's still probably the foundation of what I decide to be involved in. And I guess after the club nights and finishing off at Red Bull, I took a year. It turned out to be less than a year, it turned out to be 8 months or so, where I was doing some freelance bits on the side to just pay for rent and stuff and food. But in the meantime, I was asking a lot of questions. I was hitting people up for I had lunch with a booking agent, realised I didn't want to do that. I had lunch with someone who works at a label, big them up now, Sean. And then a lot of other disciplines within music, just to figure out what it is, what the lay of the land is, because, we were saying this just before, I guess there's a lot of creative industries, there's a lot of gatekeeping, and so that information isn't so readily available. So just those initial conversations allowed me to kind of be I'm going to try my hand at management. So I tried managing a friend of mine. That takes being very clear with your expectations of where you want this to go, and vice versa, and then what kind of work that is involved, and both being aligned on that's what needs to be done. And if, for whatever reason, one or the other isn't kind of moving in the same direction, then it's probably best to part ways.
So then, I guess, because when you were having your conversations, did you have a conversation with a manager? And then
I had a conversation with the manager who told me what it is exactly a manager's responsible for, and it's very much a partnership with that artist of how you help build their audience and essentially make their music heard by more people. And depending on the relationship with the artist, I guess input on the creative, maybe even input on the music. If you really believe in the musician, I don't think your input in the music should be overly heavy.
But so this is interesting because if we go back to when you were at Red Bull and you're doing both sports, you were doing music, then you came back to the UK, but you decided to say, I actually want to go more frontline with it. Why didn't you think to yourself, okay, I could stay within Red Bull and kind of work up the ranks, and therefore I don't have to, I've already got all the resources available to me, so then it's an easier sell when I'm trying to get artists or the current artists on the roster. I can do their campaigns at a much higher level at that point.
It's a good question. I guess within Red Bull, the way it's structured, I sat in a team, I guess, that didn't really allow for that. I think I felt like I got as far as I could, looked up and was like, do I want my manager's job? And the answer was no. And so rather than trying to move from another team to another team, I just felt like I needed a fresh start, to be honest. I just felt like there wasn't anyone's job in that company that I wanted. Oh, wow. I literally was looking around, I was like, maybe I'll go for that. But even then, in 2 years, I could see myself not wanting to do that. So there didn't feel like anything that I could say for 3 years I'd stay at that company in a new role. So it just felt like it was the right time.
Right time to go.
Yeah.
And I imagine being in Austria, that in itself is not the most. I mean, it's a nice country, but it's not the most glamorous places
Yeah,
to
it's
go
so
to
small,
work at
bro.
Red Bull,
It's so
right?
small. Especially when
Yeah.
you grow up in London, you realise as well, like Salzburg's 150,000 people. It's like the size of Coventry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
yeah.
it's not.
Much more beautiful though.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, much more beautiful in some ways, but also it's like no black people. Like it's like, yeah, I guess in terms of diversity and that affecting in terms of like what there is to eat, what there is to do, like culturally what's interesting, it's definitely lacking. But the deal I had there was really good. I had a car, and I think people don't really appreciate when you got a car and you're on continental Europe.
You go
You can
anywhere.
go anywhere. Get to like Germany in an hour. Get to
You met us in Prague at that time.
yeah, exactly. 4-hour drive. Picked you guys up in Prague. We came back to Austria. So it's quite yeah. That was a really amazing time to do that as well. Quite young. But yeah, I think with Red Bull it kind of just reached this natural conclusion, and I was very ready. Yeah, very ready to start again somewhere.
But that experience, did it teach you anything? Like any lessons?
Massively, massively. I think even as a person, I think moving to uni kind of is your big first move, and you figure out what it is, like how to live on your own. But I think in Austria, without any kind of defaults to fall back on of like people you know or like things you know, kind of are starting a lot from like scratch and just like understanding what it is you like. So I think I grew a lot personally as a human being in a 2-3 year. And then also you meet people from so many different backgrounds and so many different perspectives. And so just hearing all those different stories and just how people have lived and where people have lived. And I had a friend from Hong Kong, a friend from Leeds, a friend from Valencia, Amsterdam. And so just hearing, just your world just grows exponentially of perspectives, and that's always super valuable. From a work perspective, I learned more about what the music industry is actually, because we would be dealing with, or some of the teams would be dealing with managers and booking agents and artists, and you then get an understanding of like, oh, there's a whole world over there I don't really have any understanding of. I kind of need to start again somewhere else to kind of get that. And so
what was that conversation like to your parents? So saying that you want to take a break from work completely, because I know for me personally, when I quit my job, like I didn't tell my dad until I had things settled out kind of thing. I didn't even tell him I was thinking about doing it, because I just didn't want to give him that set of uncertainty, you know? And I think, especially depending on the background that you're from, there's a lot of focus on just making sure you have all your ducks in a row, but sometimes it's not possible.
Yeah, they're different generation as well. I think that generation is like why? Like you got something good, stick it out. But I think, fortunately, with my dad's background, he's been like always been very entrepreneurial, because he was a teacher, then he worked for Warner Brothers, and then he started like mobile phone shops when they were just kind of blowing up, and then kind of went into property. So he's kind of done lots of different things, and so I think he understood that like, yeah, naturally just switch up, and so I think I was quite open to having that conversation. What became more of a frank conversation is that I needed somewhere to live, which became more of an interesting conversation.
Wait.
For a short
Let's
period.
stop there. What do you mean? You said, because you're coming back to
Yeah,
the UK.
well, I came back to the UK at that point, was kind of living with my ex-girlfriend, or girlfriend at the time, and or between that. And then when I quit my job in the UK in Red Bull, because I came from Austria Red Bull to UK Red Bull, and after a couple of year, I was just like, I'm going to quit. And I was like, kind of, if I'm going to quit, have this much saved, but I can pay most of that to them in rent, and I could just like not have to be stressed out. So that was I appreciate them for being like very like easy about that, to be honest. And not everyone's got that privilege of even having their family in the city they live in, let alone like to be able to live with them still. So yeah, very grateful. But it wasn't as challenging as I thought it might be, to be honest. Yeah, they were very understanding.
That's good. That's good to hear. I think it's always important. Well, it's nice when you have that kind of grace where your parents allow you to figure things out, because I think like naturally when you go through the school, when you go through uni, especially if you have a placement and you go straight into the job where you had a placement with, it's easy to see all the steps in front of you. And when you're trying to follow your own heart, or you think that there's something more out there for you, there's not necessarily a guidebook for that. You kind of have to figure out for yourself what you want to do. But I guess you're lucky because you knew it was music, right? Like, I guess, did you grow up in a music household?
No, not really, to be honest. I think growing up now, I look back and I'm like, looking retrospectively at like what was the music background in my house. So my mum is way more taste and way like broader sense of music. So she would like be listening to like, I mean, India Irie, Music Soul Child, Amy Winehouse, The Cranberries, like all relatively soulful stuff, but then some like tinges of indie stuff as well, actually. Lots of lovers rock. So there was it. I don't think I maybe took it in. I think some people when they're kids, they can go either two ways. They either like absorb what their parents love or completely reject it. I think I rejected it until like my like 20s, and I was like hearing stuff that they're playing. I was like, oh, actually,
I know
this
this
is really
track. I like
good.
this one.
This is actually really good. So yeah, I think my musical background wasn't massive. I think where I knew I loved music actually was my godfather used to take me for my birthday every year to see, there's like 2 CD shops. I really don't know if they exist anymore.
That was CDs, not records, yeah.
Not records, CD shop in Brixton. They did sell records, I'm sure. That format wasn't relevant to me at the time. But he used to take me every year, and I used to get all like stacks and stacks of hip hop albums. And I got Wu-Tang Clan, 36 Chambers, Nas, Godson, Jay-Z, Reasonable Doubt. That was like my first, like, that's when I loved, my first like love of music was hip hop. So that's why I used to get like, my education was that, and then rinse those CDs for the whole year.
Guess what my first single that I bought was?
I know what mine was. I know what mine was, and mine's not that tasteful. So I'll give you all the grace you need.
Mine was Get Your Freak On, Missy Elliott. Yeah.
See, that's good. That's good. That's not even just like that's
I still know the words every single. Like I know every single word to that track.
Yeah, mine was not that tasteful. Mine was quite embarrassing, actually.
Do you remember though?
I remember
what was
it. Will Smith getting jiggy with it.
That's not bad.
It's bad, man.
Why?
Missy Elliott, I'd still listen to that today. You
Yeah,
see
but
bumping, I'm going to Miami.
That's a classic though. Come on.
The sample's cold, but yeah, not proudest of the first. But after that, it was clean, smooth sailing.
Okay, fair. So you're working through like your list of all these different areas of music that you're interested in. So you spoke to labels, you spoke to managers.
Yeah.
What did you have anything to help you on like framing what you wanted to do? Because at the time, did you start working again, or were you?
I was working, but I was doing like
freelancing
stuff. Actually, like ironically for like a lot of music, not a lot, but like people or agencies were coming on and they were like, oh, we want to pitch this music thing to Ray and Nephew. And I was like, okay, cool. I have experience of like pitching ideas for brands, having done that at Red Bull. Like if you've got an idea, you go through a process of creating a deck, pitching it in. Management is like, yeah or no. And so
that's like if you know the people, you know the people. So you had like a contact book.
I had a contact. I worked with the person who I ended up working freelance with. Is someone who I'd worked with on a project at Red Bull, and we had a good relationship. And so that came quite naturally. When I told them I was going to quit, they asked me if I'd be up for doing some bits there. So I was like, yes, great.
It's always important to keep those links, you know. Networking is key.
Networking is key. Yeah. Relationships like always important to. If there's people you gravitate towards, it's always good to keep those relationships strong. You never know when you like want to call up on that person and ask a favour, and vice versa. So.
So you were going through that list whilst you were freelancing, essentially. So then. When did you? So you were doing the nights house. Was that just you throwing a party?
That was me throwing parties. Yeah, that was me, John and Sean at the time throwing parties.
Free parties?
No, not necessarily. Like ticketed, but all like relatively cheap. You're not paying more than a tenner.
Why did you do parties? Like
parties, just at the time I was starting to DJ.
Okay.
So it gave me an outlet to DJing as well.
So then if you thought about doing music and with the other, say the more business aspects of things, right? Then there's that artistic, creative side of things. So you decided to go down that DJing route.
Yeah, so
you could have been a producer, MC.
No, yeah, I guess DJing. I feel of those three you mentioned is probably the most accessible. I think You really got to back yourself as an MC, which I didn't. Production requires, I think, a lot more time, investment, knowledge, hardware, motivation. I think all you essentially need in this day and age is a USB. I guess I started on vinyl, so all you needed was like, I guess, 2 turntables, and at the time that was costing me like £150 each, so 300. Kind of, you need £300-400 to get started, really.
Did it start as a hobby, or?
Oh yeah. Even to this day, because of how I work and how I've got other revenue streams in. Essentially, I don't rely on it for money, so I can keep it quite pure. To be honest, I can keep it very. Like, I will do something because I think it's interesting, fulfilling, when it comes to DJing versus like bank. Don't get twisted.
You want to get paid. So Theo can do 3 gigs now.
Yeah. But like, if it's like a friend and it's a small party and it's like 150 club, and I'm like, that looks like it could be a vibe. That is a conversation where I'm open to a fee conversation. The more corporate it becomes, the more money I want for it, because it's no longer.
It's not your money. It's
money.
business money, yeah,
exactly. It's no longer a creative decision. It's a business decision at that point. And so shout out a couple brands last year. I was going to name them, but I felt like nah.
You want to get that next gig booking?
That next gig. Check out the comments. Leave the comment in the comments. But yeah, I started, I think around that time, that's probably what I should have said as well. I think around that time I was finishing up at Red Bull, I just started DJing, got a radio show on a local radio station, getting a bit of interest. The label, I wouldn't say it was doing particularly well, but the party became a label.
At what point?
At the point I just started leaving Red Bull.
Okay.
So I actually made some very good friends at Red Bull. One who I still work with on the label, Scenic Route, and initially a party, and another, shout out Sean Keating. He is in the band of the second act that we signed, but he just sent me some music. We always sent music to each other, but he sent me some music one day, and I was just like, oh, this is cold. Who's this? He's like, oh, it's my band. I was like,
oh, nice.
You didn't tell me you were in a band, so that was really nice. And so the first 2 projects we put out were from friends who had asked us, because at that point we were just operating as a party. They're like, you guys have got good taste. Like, what do you think I should do with this? And they were like, would you be interested in putting it out? And we're like, we're not a label. But that gave us a lot of confidence to then become a label, because for anyone who wants to start a label, you need music as a starting point. You need music that you want to put out there. And so that was available. And then because we'd been doing okay financially from the parties, we were able to put that money into starting a label. So from a business perspective, that's kind of how we funded those first couple of releases, because they were vinyl releases, which costs considerably more than a digital release.
Like how much more? Why do people do vinyl versus digital?
It's a great question, Yemi. Great question. I find myself asking every release we work on, because I think there's, in all of this, in the label way, we should, as if you work at a label, you should, how I see things is that the artist is in charge, essentially, to an extent, of their art. And so if that's a request they have and they want that, and a lot of the time it's a positioning thing, and a lot of the times I want to be able to see my physical record in a record shop when I go in there, and they want that kind of almost, I would say elevation, but it just feels very real.
It feels nice,
It feels very real. I think I make it sound very like a vanity thing, but it is.
No, but
like,
to a degree,
exactly.
if you're a creator, you always want to be able to see it and feel it. And
Exactly.
I think in this world where everything has become digital,
Yeah.
everything's streaming, like, how often is it we can get close to people? And I feel like when people can actually go out and buy something physical from you, it can be merch, but if it's an actual like record, you know that's a real fan.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, I was someone who collects and DJs with records. I love records, especially when someone's put a lot of consideration in how it looks and what it presents. And so I think it's always an ongoing question, because there are environmental issues with plastic, obviously, as well. And then there's also like, the want of the artist, if they really think that's important. Also a decision that comes into a factor that we also have to consider as a label is how many are you going to press, and do you have a big enough fan base to then sell those out? Because it was nice having 300 records pressed, but is that going to sit at the foot of my bed for the next 2 years until I sell it out? Because I do a lot of the sending out from my house, and so I've got the records in my room. I don't want to be sitting on like 100 records.
That's just dead stock, basically.
Exactly. And so there's a lot of considerations to come when it comes to whether you put physical, like vinyl out versus digital. And it also begs the question is vinyl the best physical option? Is like a really nicely designed tape, or is it like a CD, or is it a USB, or is it a merch item that's like thematic to what the release is? So it's a big question, I think, across the music industry as a whole, to be honest, because the issue as well as demand and supply, like actually speak to anyone who works at a semi-sized label, to put your music out on vinyl, it takes about 6 months now.
Oh, wow.
It used to be 3 months, really, as a max. And now, because of
the demand
and how many actual pressing plants exist in the world, it's just not enough. There's too many requests coming in for not enough actual supply of stock or pressing plants. So I think a lot of artists are asking themselves that, do I want to wait a year essentially to put my records out, or is it fine on digital for now?
So I guess for you as a label, the value that you add is being able to put people's music out and also to give them the financial backing to do the records and stuff like that.
Exactly. If you're sitting there at home and you're making music and your main priority isn't selling yourself or marketing, or like you come to us and that is what we do essentially, and have the connections to hopefully get your music on radio, hopefully get some nice press written, hopefully help to sell it.
So you can excuse my ignorance, but like how would that differ from, say, being a music manager? Or would you work closely with the manager?
There's some lines in there for sure. There's some blurred lines in there for sure. But essentially, the label is responsible for the release. I think the contract will be a very long one, and it will have all different nuances in there. But essentially, depending on the terms of the deal, let's say it's one album, you are responsible for working with that artist on the terms of that one release. A manager, that's long term.
That's long term.
That's long term. That's thinking about beyond that release. That's thinking about touring. That's thinking, even though a booking agent will really be doing that for you, you'd be having very much an input into that. That's like, how do we grow you beyond working with, let's say, that one label? Maybe I'm going to go to the next label for that second or third release. What does that look like in terms of partnerships? A manager should be looking at all types of ways of building the audience and getting your artist paid more. Like, is that remixes? Is that like getting them featured on someone else's track? That's all a manager's, I say, responsibility.
Because I don't know, for some reason I've always felt that the label was a bit more involved in some of those decisions being made, because I don't know, like I felt like they can manage the whole artist persona from front to back, as well as the tours that they do, because they can also take a cut from that. Any releases that they do, any merch they do, even their, like I said, the brand as well.
We don't necessarily, so maybe I'll give a bit of background on speed up my story, because it'll maybe give context as to why I can maybe answer those questions on a bigger level rather than my small label. But I guess past working on Red Bull, I worked at Resident Advisor, which we can dip into at some point if you want to. And then most recently, in the last 2 years, I joined XL Recordings, and that kind of boasts artists on the label, like, I guess most famously, who's no longer on the label, but Adele, Gigs, Nines is released on there, Sampha, Arca, Jill Scott Heron, the list goes on. So it's quite we've worked with bigger acts, and so I guess how I have maybe some credentials to answer your question previously is that, yeah, I guess how managers and labels work together is very different, artist per artist and manager per manager. I have had the pleasure of working with some amazing managers, also had the process of working with some managers who are maybe not as on top as they could be.
A bit scatty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you do pick up the slack on some of those, and you do feel yourself inputting. And then sometimes you just have a really good relationship with the artist and manager where they welcome your input on things. I think I work with an act that I really enjoy working with, and they're very open to me suggesting things that go beyond my job role because they like input.
And then do you use that as a testing ground essentially for what you can do with Scenic Group?
Yeah, it's really, I'm really fortunate to be in a place where I work. My long-term goal is one day to be able to have a label that allows me to live off of that, and it's a really amazing opportunity to be testing that out with one of the best independent labels in the world, essentially. So. Yeah, it's very transferable, the skills. And I've learned a lot in the 2 years I've been there about just how it all works, to be honest, because even running a label, I was doing it so blindly. Like we were doing it so blindly. We just winging it. Yeah, winging it. And that's, I mean, sometimes you just gotta hope you can swim, you know? Like you just gotta dive in and figure it out sometimes. Like I think and hope you don't make too many expensive mistakes.
Yeah. It feels like all of the steps that you've taken, they kind of easily flowed into the next one. Is that designed like on purpose? Did you have anything to kind of guide you into that journey to say, okay, I want to make sure I'm at a major record label at some point?
Yeah. I had like at that point that I quit Red Bull and I was having meetings with people. There's a colleague I really got on well at Red Bull, and he was like, "Oh, my girlfriend's friend works at XL. You should chat to her." So we got lunch, and after that lunch, I was like, "I want that job."
Okay.
I literally was like, "I want that job." So fast forward, maybe it was that 4 or 5 years after that.
You got that job.
Got there.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was. I've always had that in my mind's eye. That's kind of what I wanted, but there was a process during COVID where I was working. I think the first 6 to 8 months of COVID, and I was like everyone at home contemplating their future and life, looking very introspectively. But yeah, just trying to figure out what I wanted to do next and how and if that XL thing was still something I wanted to do. And I started reading into just certain ways of like questioning myself, and I had a really good conversation with my friend Javier, who's like a life coach. And he was like, "Have you heard about Ikigai?" And I was like, "I don't know what that is." And he explained that it's the Japanese term for like self-fulfillment. And there's kind of a like diagram and format and model it's almost like a diagram that you can start inputting in your own details to get, I guess, your Ikigai, your self-fulfillment, understanding of self and what inspires you and what you want to work on, essentially. Real quick, like elevator pitch, Ikigai. It's 4 concentric circles. At the top is what you love doing. I think the next one is what you're good at. The bottom one is what you can be paid for. And then the furthest on the right is what the world needs more of. And what you start doing is inputting all your answers into that. And everyone's will be different because what you enjoy doing and what you're good at will all be very specific to yourself. And then from that, you start crossing over things that gives you your profession, your vocation. It gives you just a lot of, for me, it just reaffirmed and made it very crystal clear the things that I wanted to do. And some of those things were working with artists really closely to campaign manage and to essentially be a part of their creative process beyond the music to build them as artists. And I'd wrote iterations of that. And it's very manifestation, if you believe in manifestation, which I do. 2 months later, I got the call from XL and they asked me if I wanted to interview for a job that was campaign managing. And so once I was very clear on what it is I wanted to do, which I felt was maybe always at the back of my head, this was very reaffirming to know that this is actually, these are things. And if it's not Excel, is that managing an artist? Is that working back in club nights when things turn back on again? And is that working with like collectives and artists? And so, yeah, and then to be honest, it wasn't just the job that got me, that I got from that process. And what the world needs more of, I felt that the world needs to hear more stories of marginalized people and perspectives and stories of people that may have been originators of things but not have got the kudos or the accolades they deserve and didn't get their flowers. So there was things I expanded on from that thinking as well, which was like some writing stuff, telling some stories in that way. I did like a project for Resident Advisor, which was about essentially covering 100 black artists that RA haven't covered in the past, and tried to tell the stories of a lot of those artists. And so we did that story, we did that project really successfully. And that also allowed us to pay, because a lot of the writers were black or are black who wrote on that project. And so that allowed me to help essentially 9 other black writers get paid.
That's amazing.
And so that was like a good project to be involved in. But that all came from just doing that little task. And
it's interesting because if COVID didn't happen, you were still DJing. So your route could have been completely different because the club nights could have still been happening.
Yeah.
So outside of being a manager, doing this type of job, being a label owner, it could also be you being an artist yourself.
Yeah, it could have been that. I've got a lot of friends who are that, and not sure I'm cut out for the life. I think I'm a bit more, my pace is a bit slower for life. I think I enjoy it. I love dipping into it, and I love playing music, and I love that side of things. But also, I'm just very aware of what I do like about club spaces. And more often than not, that's like hearing music I love, which for the most part doesn't get played in venues of 1,000 people. Yeah. And so like if that's your ambition to essentially be a DJ who can pay their rent and have a life off of that and potentially buy a house and stuff, it kind of means you need to be playing at those kind of venues. You need to be making enough money to support that lifestyle. And so then your decision making becomes business, and that would take all the joy out of it for me.
So for you, it's like DJing is just more of you want to keep it as a hobby. Because I feel like nowadays, there's so much pressure for people to monetize their hobbies. Like I've even felt it myself before. And like now, it just takes away the purity of it.
Takes away the fun. Like even working in as like my life now is music, in the sense I run a label and then work for a label. Even that, I have to check myself sometimes on my relationship with music, because I'm just like, damn, I've listened to like no music necessarily I wanted to listen to today. And that's working at Excel. That's working, but it's not I don't like it. I haven't chosen to listen to this. It's like, I have to listen to this because we're going to be working with this artist, or well, this artist has got who's adjacent to an artist we're working with has done this live stream. I should check that out. So big parts become work that's enjoyable because it's more fun than a lot of things that I don't enjoy. But my relationship has changed with music, and DJing, I can hold on to that. I can hold on to that. No one's touching that. So that's what's fun about that.
Yeah. So is that what keeps you like interested in the scene without it just becoming?
Yeah, it's very honest. I think my relationship with that is, I love it.
How about like some of the other artists that you might have met, so some of your idols, right? Has there been any? Obviously, we can always talk about the good stuff, but has there been like one story where you're like, wow, I should never meet my heroes?
To be honest, there's only a few people that I like really am like geeked out by that I probably would avoid meeting, because I know that actually the disappointment is real. And so there's not too many. I think working in it for a while has made me a little bit less fan, like I don't really lose my shit too often.
But on that actually, so knowing that some of the people who dedicated so much to their craft ended up neglecting, say, their family life, their personal life, and then with you, with all the pies or the plates that you're spinning, is that playing on the back of your mind, like how to make sure you don't neglect those relationships?
Yeah, 100%. Not because of those people, to be fair, but more because of checking in with myself. I think music industry and a lot of creative industries are very interesting because you meet people and work with people who, for the most part, have similar interests to you. Therefore, you then end up going to a lot of, alongside that, there's also a lot of events that happen around those things. So I could have 2 weeks of going to work events and going to live events with people I work with and who I love a lot of the people I work with. I think they're great. And then also a lot of people who you bump into who are more like associates and stuff. Yeah. You can find you're spending more time with those people who aren't necessarily like loved ones, family members or close friends, but end up spending so much more time with those other people because of the needs to be in those spaces with those people. And those things are essential as well because it's networking to an extent. It's like being around things you love. You're going to it because you have a passion for this artist or music or whatever. But you do catch yourself, or I do catch myself. I'm like, damn, when's the last time I saw like the homies?
Especially summertime because as you're a DJ, you're still getting booked. Like you're doing Glasgow, you're doing what's that other place? Dimensions Festival. You're doing all these bigger places, and then hopefully you're going to be touring soon.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm ready to come and be a bodyguard or be the manager. Just let me know. I'm ready to go.
Germany, if you want to come to Munich with us, we've got a couple of gigs there in March, so. Okay, more than welcome.
I'm going to hold you to that.
Honestly,
I need Glasgow because I can't get tickets for Glastonbury, so I need to get to Glastonbury.
I'm waiting for my call up for Glastonbury again. Fingers crossed.
Okay, cool. So to wrap up, I'm going to ask you 2 more questions. Yeah. So the first one being, what's your long-term vision? So you said about the label, but what about? Is there anything greater than that? Like, is it so? Because you mentioned about giving a voice to, say, like, marginalized voices. Does that embed into your plans as well, without putting too much words in your mouth?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's a good question. I feel like the way I've got things at the moment, in terms of, like you said, lots of different things. I've got DJing. I've got a couple projects that are charity projects. I've got the label that I work for and the label I run, and so there's lots of different things that satisfy different things. I think the marginalised groups and telling those stories, I think I'd like to do some writing again at some point when I have more headspace, because I think someone who's not naturally a writer, it takes a lot of work. So hopefully there's something I can engage in with that. But long term, essentially, I think I would like to get to a place in the future where it's fully autonomous, where it's all my ideas and my visions, being able to pay, I guess not all my ideas, but I guess I've created an infrastructure or company or label that allows me to basically make that my day-to-day and pays for that. So whatever that looks like, I would like that. And then that hopefully allows me the freedom and time and space to do the other things, because doing all those things together is a lot of time and energy.
And this is a bit of a segue.
Yeah.
So I'm into book recommendations.
Into book recommendations?
Yeah, I need to get some more into my life.
Okay.
So what's the one book that you've recommended or gifted to people the most?
Oh.
And why?
That's a good question. I'm just about to start a book that I've been recommended by about 3 or 4 different people.
That's not what I asked.
I know you didn't ask me, but I'm going to plug this one because I can't think of one myself. But Bell Hooks All About Love is something that's been...
I heard that's deep, but...
I've just bought it, so I'm going to be dipping into that. And something I've recommended, I could lie and just say something, but oh no, you know what? I've been reading this 3-part trilogy called The Broken Earth by something called N.K. Jemisin, which is really good. But like, if that's for any sci-fi geeks,
that's me, man. Have you read The Martian?
The Martian, no.
Yeah. Oh, you'll like that.
Yeah, okay.
The Martian and Wool. Those are my two recommendations for you.
Okay.
Cool. So that's it. Thanks for joining me today.
No, thank you for having me.
Where can we find you? Like, tell us, like, Carnival Lost Tapes, all the rest of your projects that are going on at the moment.
I guess from a DJ perspective, if you want to book me in that, it's at 404.eros, E-R-O-S. And then if you're looking at the label, that scenic route. If you just want to see some nice pictures of things I eat, Theo_Fab. But yeah, those are my tags and bits and pieces. But yeah, thank you for having me.
No worries, man. Until next time.
Cheers.
Cheers, bro.